She signed the prenup to protect what she built, and he canceled the wedding in front of 500 people to punish her for it. But what nobody in that cathedral knew was that the prenup had just stopped him from stealing everything she owned. Stay, because what happened next will shock you until the very last second. Her name was Amara Osei, and she did not arrive in this world with advantages. She arrived in a 2-room house in Kumasi, Ghana, where her mother repaired other people's clothes to pay Amara's school fees. But that small house had something wealth could never buy. A mother who looked her daughter in the eyes every morning and said, "The world does not have to give you anything. You can take it yourself." Amara believed her, and she never stopped. By 32, Amara Osei had turned her childhood blueprints into a real interior design firm in Accra. No inheritance, no investor. One borrowed laptop, one loyal client, and a stubbornness the world had not yet figured out how to break. Now, she had 7 employees, 3 city contracts, and a waiting list that made competitors nervous. She drove herself to every job site. She remembered every client's birthday. Success had not changed her. It had simply confirmed what her mother always knew. For all she had built, Amara carried one private ache. Not loneliness, exactly. More like the awareness of an empty chair at a table she had set beautifully. She wanted a partner, not to complete her. She was already complete. But to witness her, someone who could sit across from everything she had built and say, "I see what this cost you, and I am proud of you." She had almost stopped believing that man existed, and then she walked into a gala in Accra on a Thursday evening in March. Kwame Asante was everything a room noticed first. Tall, tailored, educated in London, heir to the Asante property empire that had built half the luxury high-rises along the Lagos waterfront. He could have talked about himself all evening. He didn't. He found Amara beside the architecture exhibition, and he asked about her work. He leaned forward when she answered. He remembered what she said. 3 conversations later, she was already in trouble. And she knew it. And she didn't stop. Kwame was magnificent at the beginning. Not in a showy way, in a precise way. He remembered the name of her first client. He knew her coffee order on the 3rd date. He appeared at her studio unannounced on the evening she lost a major contract, carrying food and saying nothing, except, "You don't have to talk. I'm just here." She had dated charming men before. Kwame was something different. He made her feel known, and of all the things love can offer, that is the most dangerous one. He proposed on the roof of the first. Building her firm had redesigned. He had decorated it in private. String lights, white roses, the song she hummed at her desk playing softly from a small speaker. When he went down on one knee and said, "You are the one extraordinary thing I never planned for," she laughed and cried simultaneously. She said yes before the sentence was fully formed. It was the most honest yes she had ever spoken. She would later understand that honest feelings can still walk into dishonest situations. The engagement announcement hit Lagos society like a match to petrol. The Asante name meant guest lists were instantly multiplied. Kwame's mother booked the Cathedral of St. Michael, 500 seats, a Paris-based florist, an orchestra, 3 separate event coordinators. Amara smiled through all of it, privately overwhelmed. This was not the wedding she had imagined, intimate, warm, personal. This was a production, a performance. But she loved him, so she adjusted. She did not yet know the performance had already begun, long before the invitations were printed. Her friend Nana Agyemang had been a family lawyer for 9 years. She did not bring up the prenuptial agreement with excitement. She brought it up carefully over coffee on a Tuesday, sliding a notepad across the table as if it were something fragile. "Everything you built came before him, Amara. The law should reflect that." Amara stared at the notepad. "It feels like I'm planning to lose him." Nana looked at her steadily. "Or," she said, "you're planning to always have yourself." That sentence stayed. It moved into Amara like a root. She made the decision at 2 in the morning, alone in her studio. She looked at the drafting table she had bought second-hand, the award plaques she had earned alone, the client files stacked in the cabinet she had assembled herself with instructions in a language she did not speak. No one had handed her any of this, not a single square inch. And if love was real, if Kwame was what he said he was, then asking the law to acknowledge what was already true should cost her nothing. She called Nana at 7 the next morning. "Draft it," she said. "Fair and clean." The document Nana prepared was 12 pages. Precise. Fair. It protected Amara's business assets, intellectual property, and personal savings, all accumulated before she ever met Kwame Asante. It offered him nothing less than what any honest groom deserved. It asked for nothing he had ever promised. Nana reviewed it 4 times. "This is as generous as a prenup gets," she said. "If he loves you, this changes nothing." Those words turned out to be exactly true. It changed nothing for a man who loved her. But Kwame Asante did not love Amara Osei. Not in the way she deserved to be loved. She chose a quiet Saturday. She made jollof rice with grilled tilapia. His favorite, the way his mother made it. She waited until dinner was finished and the dishes were cleared. Then she placed the white envelope on the table between them and said gently, "Nana helped me put something together. Just a formality, protecting what I built before us. It doesn't change anything between you and me." He looked at the envelope without touching it. Then he looked at her, and for the first time in 18 months, Amara saw something in his eyes she could not name. He read it that night. She heard him through the wall, the desk chair, the slow turning of pages, the long silences between. At 3 in the morning, he came back to bed. He did not touch her. He lay on his side, facing the wall. Amara lay perfectly still in the dark and felt the room change temperature, not physically, but in the way only people who love someone deeply can feel when something shifts beneath the surface of a person, like a plate moving deep in the earth. She told herself, "It's just new information. He needs time." She was already lying to herself. For 3 days, Kwame spoke to her in single syllables. Yes, fine. Later. He answered her questions like a man on trial, choosing his words carefully. He kissed her cheek where he used to kiss her lips. He sat at the same dinner table and ate, in silence that grew thicker with each passing meal. Amara watched him across those meals and tried every explanation her love could manufacture. Wedding stress, workload, the magnitude of commitment finally sinking in. She had such an extraordinary capacity for giving the people she loved the benefit of doubt. It had always been her greatest strength. Right now, it was her greatest vulnerability. On day 4, he confronted her. No raised voice. Kwame Asante never raised his voice. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, eyes steady, and said, "That document made me feel like a liability you were managing, not a man you were choosing." Amara set down her spoon. "It protects both of us." "It protects you," he said. Then he walked out of the kitchen and closed the door behind him. Not a slam, a careful, deliberate close. The quiet of a man who had already decided something and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. Amara called Essie from the bathroom floor at 8 that evening because the bathroom was the only room without a memory of him in it. He said the prenup made him feel managed, she whispered. Essie was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then, Amara, "A man who is threatened by your self-protection is telling you everything you need to hear. The question is whether you are ready to listen." Amara pressed her back against the bathtub. She stared at the ceiling tiles. She did not answer immediately, because Essie was right. And being right about this was the thing she had been hoping, desperately, quietly, that nobody would be. A week later, Kwame signed the prenuptial agreement. He said nothing before signing. He did not read it again. He placed the pen on the paper and pressed down with a force that she could see from across the table, like a man signing a warrant, not a promise. One long, single stroke. He slid it back without looking at her, went to the living room, turned on the television. Amara sat alone at the kitchen table with the signed document in her hands and thought, "This should feel like relief. Why doesn't this feel like relief?" In the days that followed the signing, Kwame said 3 things that Amara catalogued without understanding why. First, "You're remarkably independent for someone about to be someone's wife." He laughed when he said it. She laughed too. Second, "My father says a woman who protects her assets is a woman who expects to leave." She didn't respond to that one. Third, The morning of the last week before the wedding, while she was at her mirror, some things, once set in motion, Amara, cannot be stopped. She thought he was talking about the wedding. He was not talking about the wedding. 4 days before the wedding, Kwame's mother called. The voice was soft, perfectly calibrated. "My dear Amara, we are simply thrilled for Saturday. Kwame is such a giving man. He gives everything to the people he loves. I do hope the formalities haven't created any unnecessary tension. He can be sensitive, you know." A pause. "We just want Saturday to be perfect." Amara thanked her warmly. When she put the phone down, she sat very still and translated the conversation into its actual language. A warning from a woman who knew something Amara did not yet know. Here is what Amara noticed quietly in those final weeks, and filed away without knowing she was filing it. He never asked a single question about the prenuptial agreement's contents, not one. A man who felt wrongly treated would have read every line and argued every clause. Kwame signed it without question, like a man who had already decided it would not apply to him. She noticed the way you notice a change in the weather. Not yet rain, not yet storm, just the air becoming something different, something that smells, very faintly, of what is coming. Kwame's best man, Femi Adeyemi, had known Kwame since secondary school in Lagos, 15 years of friendship. Which is why, when Kwame called him 3 days before the wedding and asked him to be ready for anything on Saturday, Femi's stomach dropped. "Ready for what?" Femi asked carefully. "Just be there, Femi," Kwame said. "Closest to me. Whatever happens." Femi spent 2 days trying to convince himself it was nerves. On the morning of the wedding, standing at the altar watching Kwame's face, he understood it was not nerves, but by then it was already too late to stop anything. 2 nights before the wedding, Osei arrived uninvited. She sat on Amara's sofa with her coat still on and said, "Postpone it." Amara looked up from her wedding binder. "Osei, I'm serious, Amara. Something is wrong. I cannot name it. But it has been wrong since the day he signed that paper without asking a single question." Amara closed the binder. "You're asking me to walk away from the man I love based on a feeling." Osei held her gaze. "I'm asking you to trust the feeling you've been ignoring for 3 weeks." Amara walked her to the door. She did not sleep that night. After Osei left, Amara sat on her kitchen floor, not the sofa, not a chair, the floor, and had the most honest conversation of her life with herself. She laid out the evidence like a case. The cold silences, the way he signed, Femi's strange call, his mother's coded warning, Osei's instinct. Then she laid out what she knew about love, that it required courage, that doubt was not proof, that the bravest thing a person could do was to choose someone completely. She stood up, she made tea, and she chose Kwame Asante, for what she did not yet know was the last time. The Grand Continental Hotel bridal suite smelled of white roses and champagne. Bridesmaids laughed and danced. Her mother arrived at 9 and pressed a kiss to Amara's forehead without a word. Just held her face in both hands for a long moment, the way mothers do when they are storing the memory. Amara sat at the vanity and looked at herself for a long time. "Tomorrow," she said it quietly, to no one. "Tomorrow is the beginning." She straightened her spine. She reached for the moisturizer. She was so close to what she thought was everything. She had no idea what 3 kilometers away looked like. What Amara could not see, at 12:52 a.m., 3 kilometers from the bridal suite, Kwame Asante sat fully dressed on the edge of his hotel bed, phone to his ear. The call had been running 43 minutes. The man on the other end was not a wedding planner. He was not a groomsman. He was the Asante family's private legal strategist. And the conversation was about one thing only, what the next morning's plan required and whether Kwame was still committed to it. He was. The call ended. Kwame set his phone down, straightened his tie in the mirror, and said one word to his own reflection. Ready? 6:15. Lagos gold light broke open across the skyline. Church bells from the Cathedral of St. Michael carried across 3 neighborhoods. Inside the hotel, Amara's alarm went off, the one she had set 3 weeks ago with the label she had given it. Your day. She sat up, pressed both palms flat on the mattress, breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way she always centered herself before a big project presentation. Today was the biggest project of her life. She had no way of knowing the client had already decided to cancel. The bridal suite transformed. 3 makeup artists, two stylists, a photographer moving through the beautiful, organized chaos. When Amara stepped from behind the dressing screen in full bridal look for the first time, the room went silent. 4 full seconds of struck dumb silence. Then her maid of honor started crying without warning. Then everyone started crying. Her mother crossed the room and held her face and said very quietly, "Your father would not have believed you could get more beautiful. But he would have known you were always going to." Amara closed her eyes, and for a moment, the world was entirely perfect. By 10:40, the Cathedral of St. Michael was full. 500 guests in Aso Ebi blush and gold, French lace, hand-embroidered. Agbada. Children scattered rose petals the full length of the aisle. The orchestra played Beethoven from the upper gallery, shifting to Ghanaian highlife as the hour approached. Outside, photographers lined the steps. A lifestyle television crew had set up cameras. Golden flower arrangements cascaded from every marble column, kente ribbons tied at each pew. It was, by any measure, any person in that building had ever witnessed the most beautiful wedding Lagos had seen in years. Kwame entered through the side door at 11:02. His white agbada embroidered in gold thread was the finest thing in the building. Femi took his place beside him, watching his face carefully. Kwame did not look nervous. He did not fidget. He did not look toward the doors the way grooms in love always do. Searching, impatient, wanting to see her. He stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead. And Femi, who had known him for 15 years, understood in that moment with horrible clarity that what he was watching was not a man waiting for the woman he loved. It was a man waiting for his moment. 11:15. The cathedral doors swung open. The orchestra rose into the bridal march. 500 people stood simultaneously, and Amara Osei appeared in the entrance. The sight of her was, there is no other word, arresting. The gown she had designed herself. Ivory silk, gold, embroidery in the pattern of her mother's hand-stitching, the train 6 feet long. She stood in the doorway and the morning light came in around her like it had been waiting. Her father took her arm. She looked down the long aisle at Kwame. She smiled. He did not smile back. She walked, slowly, each step on that petal-covered marble was deliberate, the walk of a woman who had earned every step of every path she had ever taken. Guests reached out as she passed, her mother's hands clasped in the front pew, eyes streaming, children pointed, women pressed hands to their hearts. Amara looked at none of it. She looked only at the man at the end of the aisle. She was close, enough now to see his expression clearly. And in the last 12 steps, something cold and quiet moved through her chest. Not fear exactly, recognition, something her body knew before her mind would allow it. Her father placed her hand in Kwame's. She felt it immediately. His hand was cold. Not the cold of nerves, the cold of a man who had already shut something down inside himself. The pastor opened his Bible and smiled at them both. "We are gathered today, in the sight of God and these 500 witnesses." Kwame was looking at her, not with love, with something Amara had never seen on his face before, a kind of studied blankness, like a man reading from a script he had memorized but did not feel. The candles flickered, the music stopped. Amara kept breathing. In, out, in. The pastor's voice rang clear through the cathedral. "Kwame Emmanuel Asante, do you take this woman, Amara Grace Osei, to be your lawfully wedded wife? To love, to honor, to cherish and protect, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" The cathedral was so quiet you could hear the candles breathe. 500 people leaned forward as one. Amara felt her father shift his weight slightly behind her. She watched Kwame's chest rise with a breath. She watched his mouth open, and everything that had ever been became something that would never be again. "I cannot do this," said quietly. Front rows only, then louder, turning toward the congregation, making sure the room heard. "I cannot marry this woman." The pastor's Bible lowered 3 inches. Amara felt his hand release hers, one finger at a time, each release deliberate, unhurried. Then the hand withdrew entirely, and he stepped back. One step, clean, rehearsed. The sound of that step on the marble floor carried through the silence like a gunshot. A woman in the 3rd row made a sound no language has a word for, and Amara stood at the altar with one hand still raised in the air where his used to be. 3 seconds of silence. Then the cathedral erupted, not in anger, in shock, in the sounds human beings make when reality fractures in front of them. A woman sobbed. A child started crying without knowing why. A groomsman said, "Kwame," and was silenced by the look on Kwame's face. The orchestra stopped mid-phrase. A single violin note hung in the golden air, unfinished, suspended, the way everything in that room was suddenly unfinished and suspended. And above all of it, above the chaos and the gasping and the sounds of 500 hearts breaking, silence from the altar, from Amara, absolute silence. If you ask anyone who was in that cathedral what they will never forget, they will not describe his words. They will describe her face, the way it moved through shock, then pain, then something that looked, for 4 terrible seconds, like complete collapse, and then stopped. They will describe the exact moment her jaw set, the exact moment her spine added a ½ inch, the exact moment she stopped being a woman whose heart was being broken in public and became something else entirely, something the 500 people in that room would spend years trying to find a word for. Kwame turned to face the congregation. The composure of it was breathtaking, the audacity of a man who had rehearsed this. "I apologize to our families for this difficult moment," he said, as if reading from a prepared statement. "But a marriage requires complete and unconditional trust. A prenuptial agreement was presented to me weeks ago. I have spent those weeks understanding what that document means. It means that the trust I require does not exist, and I cannot, in good conscience, build a marriage on conditions." In the third row, Nana the lawyer pressed her lips so hard they turned white, because she recognized exactly what those words were: scripted, legal, strategic. The first phone went up before he finished his second sentence, then 3 more, then 7. 11 recording devices pointed at the altar of the Cathedral of St. Michael by the time Kwame finished speaking. One guest in the back had already opened WhatsApp. The footage would reach 15 group chats before the final organ note died. It would hit Twitter within 20 minutes. Within 90 minutes it would be verified and clipped and captioned, and shared by people who had never heard of either Amara Osei or Kwame Asante and would never forget either name again. Then Amara did what none of the 500 expected. She gathered the train of her gown, the gown she had designed herself, the gown embroidered in the pattern of her mother's hand-stitching, and she turned toward the doors, her heels on the marble floor. Click, 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 measured, unhurried. She did not run. She did not look back. She did not stop at the doors. She pushed through them in a single motion into the Lagos sunlight, leaving behind every eye in that cathedral. And the man who had brought her there. The doors closed behind her, and the sound they made was exactly like a chapter ending. She stepped into the sunlight and stopped. She stood at the top of the cathedral steps, closed her eyes, and raised her face toward the sky. In, out, one breath that was not performed for anyone. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Lagos, wide, bright, indifferent, full of futures. Essie appeared at her side 40 seconds later, slightly breathless from running through a side corridor. She said nothing. She simply stood beside her. The photographers who had been positioned to capture a joyful couple descending those steps captured something instead that would win awards. A woman alone at the top of the world, every inch of her unbroken. Behind those closed doors, the Cathedral of St. Michael dissolved into chaos. Family elders converged in urgent clusters. Kwame's aunt grabbed his arm and hissed something into his ear that made him flinch, the first crack in his composure. All morning, Femi stood 3 feet from his best friend of 15 years and said quietly, "What did you do, Kwame?" Kwame did not answer. Amara's mother sat in the front pew surrounded by friends and did not move. She did not cry. She sat completely upright and stared at the altar flowers and said 2 words, barely audible, "She'll be fine." And she was right. The car moved through Lagos traffic. Amara sat in the back in her wedding gown and looked out the window at the city moving past. Essie sat beside her, hand over hers, saying nothing. For 11 minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Amara said, in a voice completely level, "He never asked one question about what was in the prenup." She paused. "Not one. He signed a document he'd never read." "Why would someone sign a document they'd never read?" Essie looked at her carefully. "Because," she said slowly, "they already knew it didn't matter." The car continued, and somewhere behind Amara's eyes something clicked into place. By 12:30, 11 different recordings of Kwame Asante cancelling his wedding were circulating on Nigerian WhatsApp. By 1:15, the clearest clip, 49 seconds, perfect audio, hit Twitter with the caption, "Men are not." Okay? 22,000 retweets in 90 minutes. By 2 p.m., Kwame Asante was #1 trending in Nigeria, Ghana, and the United Kingdom simultaneously. Comment sections filled without pause. Women shared it with a single word: disgraceful. Men posted shock reaction videos. News blogs in Lagos and Accra ran the headline, "Property heir cancels wedding. Was the prenup to blame?" The story was everywhere, and it was only just beginning. He had not anticipated this. Kwame sat in his hotel suite at 3 p.m. watching the number climb. 3 million views, his Instagram. Comment notifications arriving faster than the screen could refresh. His LinkedIn, his professional LinkedIn, had been found. A business partner sent a message. "Kwame, call me, immediately." His publicist called twice, and he didn't answer. His phone rang every 3 minutes. He had stood at that altar, and I believed he was in control. He had understood everything, the timing, the legal positioning, the family reaction. He had not understood one thing: the internet does not negotiate. By 6 p.m., a blogger with 400,000 followers published a thread. What Kwame Asante's wedding stunt reveals about men who fear women's financial independence. 80,000 shares before midnight. A Lagos radio host ran a 2-hour segment on the prenuptial generation, interviewing lawyers and therapists who unanimously validated Amara's decision. 3 women's organizations issued statements. The hashtag #Consign the prenup began trending organically. And the man who had tried to make Amara Osei look foolish for protecting herself had, without any effort from her, made her the symbol of a conversation that had been waiting years to be had. Chief Emmanuel Asante, 71 years old, 40 years of empire, watched the video at 8 p.m. He watched it twice, set his phone face down, sat in silence for exactly 40 minutes, then called his assistant and canceled every public engagement for the following month. He did not call Kwame that night. The silence itself was the message. In the Asante empire, his father's silence was something Kwame had only experienced once before. At 19, when he had crashed an Audi, his father had explicitly told him not to drive. This silence was not like that silence. This silence was heavier. This silence had shareholder implications. Kwame arrived at his father's office at 7 a.m. on Monday. The desk that had always seemed powerful now seemed enormous. Chief Emmanuel Asante did not stand. He looked at his son for a very long time without speaking. When he finally did, his voice was the quiet of a man who has moved past anger into something more permanent. "You embarrassed 40 years of this family's name," he said, "because a woman was intelligent enough to protect herself. I did not. Build this for my son to become a viral hashtag." He pushed an envelope across the desk. "You will step back from all public-facing roles. Immediately." Kwame said nothing. 9 days after the cathedral, Amara's legal team filed a civil claim. In the Lagos High Court, fraudulent misrepresentation. 51 pages. Precise, documented, devastating. She gave no interviews. She posted nothing on social media. Her only public statement came through Nana. 9 words to the press. "Ms. Osei built her life herself. She will protect it." The statement received 40,000 engagements in 4 hours. It was not a threat. It was not a performance. It was simply the truth of a woman who had always known the difference between the two. And then, 3 weeks after the cathedral, a document surfaced that reframed the entire story. It was not leaked by Amara. It was not leaked by Nana. It came from inside the Asante family's own legal office, from a junior associate who had been present at meetings she was never supposed to remember. The document was a strategy memo, dated 8 months before the wedding, addressed to Kwame Asante. It outlined in precise professional language a plan to marry Amara Osei, acquire access to her firm's brand equity and government contract, portfolio through spousal rights, and then challenge the prenuptial agreement post-marriage using a witness signature technicality. The wedding had never been about love. It had been a business acquisition. The memo reached a journalist at a Lagos investigative outlet on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, it had been verified by 2 independent lawyers, reviewed by a media ethics board, and published under the headline, "Asante Wedding Scandal. New documents suggest calculated business strategy, not love dispute. Social media reacted in a single wave. Fury, then something worse than fury. The cold recognition of a pattern so many women had lived and never been able to name. The memo's publication destroyed what the video had only damaged. 3 major clients of the Asante property empire issued formal notices of contract review within 48 hours. The $12 million waterfront development was canceled outright. 2 banks placed the Asante commercial accounts under temporary compliance review. Kwame's personal reputation, the thing he had valued above everything, the thing he had gone to that cathedral to protect, was now the thing most publicly destroyed. He had gone to the altar to protect an empire. In doing so, he had set it on fire. Nana called Amara the morning the memo was published and read every paragraph aloud over the phone. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Amara said, "I already knew. Not the memo, not the legal strategy, but the truth beneath it. The cold hand at the altar, the call at midnight she hadn't known about, the document signed without a single question asked. Some part of her had always known. She had simply chosen love over instinct." "You saved yourself, Amara," Nana said. "The prenup saved me," Amara replied, "but I signed it, and I will never again be ashamed of that." The abandonment of Kwame was quiet but total. 3 of the 5 groomsmen removed their wedding photographs from social media without comment. Femi gave one interview, 3 sentences. "I had concerns I raised with Kwame privately before the wedding. He chose a different path. I wish Amara Osei well." Business contacts stopped initiating. 2 gala invitations were quietly rescinded. The city that had once called him a golden son of the Asante name began to look carefully away when that name came up. Reputation, he now understood, is not an asset on a balance sheet. You cannot buy it back. You can only watch it leave. While Kwame's world contracted, Amara's expanded in ways she had not planned. Messages arrived through her firm's website, from women she had never met, referrals from people she had never spoken to. A women's entrepreneurship collective invited her to speak at their annual summit. The invitation said, "We would be honored to have a woman who refused to collapse in public show the rest of us how it is done." She accepted. She spent 4 evenings writing her speech, not about what happened to her, about what she had always been building, because that was always the better story. 3 months after the Cathedral of St. Michael, Amara Osei's firm signed its largest contract in its history, the interior redesign of a new 5-star hotel in Abuja. The client was a woman who had followed the story from the beginning, not from prurient interest, but from recognition. She tracked down the firm's portfolio, reviewed 14 completed projects, and called directly. Her opening words, "I looked you up after the story. Then I looked you up because of your work. I want someone who knows her value inside a room." The contract value exceeded 3 years of previous earnings combined. She hired 4 new staff the following week. At the Women's Entrepreneurship Summit, Amara stood at the podium and said the line that would be quoted for years after. "I did not sign the prenuptial agreement because I was afraid to love him. I signed it because I was not afraid to love myself." She paused. 300 women sat in absolute silence. "The man who stepped back at that altar did not break me. He simply removed himself from a future he was not equipped to handle. When the applause came, it started in the front row and rolled backward like a wave, until the building shook." She did not take a bow. She simply nodded, like a woman receiving something that was always hers. 6 months later, in Nairobi at a design conference, she met Daniel Mensah, an architect, thoughtful, unhurried. He never asked about the story, because he had read it and understood that what had happened to her was hers to share or not share in her own time. On their 4th conversation, he said, "The most impressive thing about you is not what you survived. It's who you clearly were before any of it." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled the way she had almost forgotten she could. Not performed, not hopeful, simply real. Here is what this story teaches us, and why it matters more than the cathedral drama. Amara Osei did not sign the prenuptial agreement because she planned for failure. She signed it because she had learned, by building everything she had, alone, from nothing, that self-protection is not the opposite of love. It is the foundation of it. The love that cannot survive your wisdom was never the love you needed. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, what looks like the worst day of your life is simply the day the wrong door closes, so that the right one can finally open without an obstacle in its way. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or remember, or feel something real, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Every week we bring you stories of courage, karma, and the extraordinary strength of ordinary people who chose themselves when it mattered most. And before you leave, we genuinely want to hear from you. What would you have done if your partner canceled the wedding in front of 500 people? Would you have walked out with your head high, or would you have stayed to fight? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one, and we will see you in the next story.